The black belt jokingly asked a little black girl to fight, but her very first move made everyone freeze. "Hey, kid, why don't you show us what you've got?" called Darren Collins, his black belt glinting under the harsh gym lights. He smirked, sure this quiet girl wouldn't be more than a moment's amusement. Amara Johnson barely looked up from tying her shoes. At 12, she was no stranger to silence, her quiet strength hidden beneath a calm exterior. But what no one knew was the legacy she carried, a family history of warriors, discipline, and sacrifice that shaped her every breath. When Darren challenged her with a laugh, the room didn't expect what came next. The gym fell silent. Not a soul moved. Because sometimes, true strength speaks without a word. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The hum of conversation in Hollow Point Martial Arts Academy had a rhythm to it, the smack of gloves on pads, the shuffle of bare feet across polished mats. A Saturday open sparring session meant anyone could step in, but today, all eyes kept drifting to the far corner. There, seated cross-legged on the mat, was Amara Holt, 12 years old, in a crisp white gi a size too big. The sleeves nearly swallowed her hands, but her posture, straight-backed, still, made her look older than she was. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't watching the matches with wide-eyed curiosity like the other kids. She simply sat. Across the room, Brad Kenner, a broad-shouldered black belt in his mid-30s, was between bouts. Sweat clung to his navy rash guard as he laughed with two other senior students. Brad had a reputation here, loud, confident, a natural showman. But subtlety? Not his strength. His eyes landed on Amara. "Hey," he called, grinning as he stepped toward her. "You here to watch, or you want to show us what you've got?" The question was half joke, half performance for the small crowd now tuning in. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Poor kid's about to get embarrassed." Amara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Not shy, not eager, just present. "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice carrying only to him. Brad grinned wider. "Ah, come on. One round. I'll go easy." Her gaze didn't flinch. That would be a mistake. That earned a louder laugh from the room. Brad placed his hands on his hips, tilting his head like he couldn't believe the little girl just said that. "Tell you what," he said, loud enough for everyone now. "If you can even touch me once, I'll give you my belt." Amara didn't answer right away. She looked past him, not at the crowd, but at the heavy bag in the corner, her focus narrowing for just a heartbeat. Then she looked back. "Okay." The laughter quieted just a little. Brad's smirk faltered, though he covered it quickly. The mood in the room shifted, barely perceptible, like the air had gotten just a bit heavier. And for the first time that day, Amara unfolded her legs and rose to her feet. Brad motioned toward the center mat, theatrically waving her forward like a master of ceremonies. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to no one in particular, "a new challenger approaches." A few students clapped. Most just smiled in that polite, "This'll be quick" kind of way. Amara stepped forward slowly. Her GI pants whispered against the mats, her bare feet making no sound at all. She stopped a few feet from Brad and bowed. A small, deliberate movement, precise and without flourish. "All right, kid," Brad said, bouncing lightly on his heels. "Don't be nervous. Just try your best." Her eyes locked on his, calm and steady. "I always do." That earned another snicker from someone leaning against the wall. Brad leaned forward, lowering his stance, clearly playing for the crowd. "I'll give you the first move." Amara said nothing. Her hands stayed at her sides. For a moment, it looked like she might actually be frozen with uncertainty. Then, in that stillness, a few people noticed something odd. Her stance, feet shoulder width, knees loose, chin slightly tucked, wasn't the clumsy posture of a beginner. It was measured, balanced, every muscle at ease yet ready. From the far end of the mats, Elliot Vargas, a 28-year-old assistant coach, stopped mid-conversation. His eyes narrowed. He knew that stance. Brad, oblivious, clapped his hands once. "Ready? Let's." But before he could finish, Amara tilted her head slightly to the right, almost imperceptible, and slid one foot forward just enough to shift her center of gravity. Elliot's brows furrowed. He'd seen that exact movement before, but only in people who knew what they were doing. The laughter in the room hadn't stopped, but it had thinned, replaced by a faint thread of curiosity. And in that moment, without moving more than an inch, Amara had gone from just a kid to someone they couldn't quite place. The center mat of Hollow Point Martial Arts Academy felt different now. The laughter still lingered in the corners, but it no longer filled the room. People were watching more closely, though most wouldn't admit it yet. Amara stood opposite Brad, her arms at her sides, breathing slow. Her GI was plain, no patches, no rank stripes. But it was tied with a belt so worn it had lost all color. Not black, not white, just a faded, undefined shade that didn't speak of recent purchase. Brad circled her lightly, trying to draw her out. "You move like you've done this before," he said, still smiling. "You take a class somewhere?" She shook her head once. "I've learned at home." He chuckled, feigning surprise. "Oh yeah? Who's teaching you?" "YouTube." From the sidelines, Elliot Vargas kept his eyes on her. He noticed the way her toes gripped the mat ever so slightly when Brad moved left. A subconscious detail most fighters learn only after years. Her shoulders didn't tense when he closed distance. Instead, they seemed to loosen, almost inviting. Amara didn't answer his jab. Her gaze flickered once toward the corner of the room, where a small canvas gym bag sat neatly by the wall. The zipper was half open, revealing the edge of something metallic. When Brad stepped closer, she raised her chin a fraction, not defiance, but acknowledgement. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke again. "My uncle taught me." There was nothing special about the statement, except the tone. It carried weight, like the name should mean something, but she didn't give it. A flash of memory stirred in her mind. The sound of waves hitting a rocky shore, the sharp smell of salt and oil from an old leather striking pad. Her uncle's voice, low and steady. "You don't win fights by showing off. You win them by ending them." The room faded back into focus. Brad was still circling, still putting on his easy, joking swagger. Someone from the back called out, "Come on, Brad, don't keep the kid waiting." He grinned, but Amara noticed his eyes checking her feet now, as though he too had picked up on the stance. Elliot crossed his arms, still watching. A small knot was forming in his stomach. He didn't know the girl's name, but something in her composure was whispering danger. And yet, she stood there as if the entire situation was a quiet conversation she could take or leave. The room was starting to feel like still water on the verge of breaking. Brad shifted his stance, bouncing lightly, every movement exaggerated for the audience. It was his comfort zone, keeping things playful, loud, and easy to read. But the quiet way Amara stood there, unblinking, made his rhythm falter more than he expected. "You sure you want to do this, kid?" he said, a smirk tugging at one side of his mouth. "I'm not going to go easy just 'cause you're little." "I didn't ask you to," she replied. Her voice was flat, not cold, but without any of the nervous cracks most kids would have in that moment. From the sideline, a teenager in a blue GI whispered to his friend, "She's either crazy brave or just crazy." The friend laughed, but neither took their eyes off her. Amara adjusted the knot on her belt, fingers moving with practiced familiarity. When she finished, she didn't drop her hands right away. Instead, she slid them into her sleeves, holding her forearms lightly. A gesture that looked casual, but Elliot recognized it instantly. It was a waiting stance, one he'd seen old-school fighters use before the first move. The gym bag in the corner caught Elliot's attention again. The metallic object inside shifted slightly as the bag slouched. This time he saw it clearly, a pair of old military dog tags, the chain tangled with a small, worn leather strap. Brad noticed his gaze. "That yours?" he asked Amara. She didn't look back at the bag. "Yes." "Souvenir?" he pressed, clearly fishing for a reaction. She hesitated, just a breath too long, then said, "They were given to me." Her tone made it sound final, like no follow-up question would be welcome. In her mind, another flicker of memory rose. A warm evening light cutting through a wooden training hall, her uncle kneeling in front of her, pressing the tags into her palm. "You'll wear these one day, but only when you understand what they mean." The crowd didn't know that story, but something about the way she spoke made a few people glance at each other. The room was tilting ever so slightly from amusement to curiosity. Brad rolled his shoulders, still trying to keep the energy up. "All right, little mystery girl. Let's see what Uncle taught you can do." Her hands slipped from her sleeves, slow and deliberate. She bowed again, the exact same bow as before, sharp in its precision. For the first time since he'd approached her, Brad didn't feel entirely in control of the moment. The mats were never silent during open sparring. There was always the muffled thud of strikes, the creak of the floor under shifting feet, the occasional laugh or cheer. But now, the noise was fractured, the rhythm uneven. Conversation stalled. The few who tried to keep talking found themselves glancing back toward the center mat without meaning to. Amara stood in her quiet readiness, that same calm poise that seemed too intentional for a child her age. Brad kept his bounce, his easy smirk, but it was losing some of its shine. From the back row of benches, Renee Porter, a woman in her late 40s wearing a gray sports jacket and jeans, tilted her head as she watched. She'd been waiting for her son's turn to spar, but now her focus was locked on the girl. That kid? She's not nervous, Renee murmured, half to herself. Beside her, a stocky man in a green tracksuit gave a chuckle. It's just a front. They all freeze once the first punch comes. Renee didn't answer. She'd worked in security for 2 decades. She knew the difference between a bluff and composure. The girl wasn't faking anything. On the other side of the mat, Elliot Vargas kept his arms crossed, the crease between his brows deepening. Every small shift in Amara's balance, every micro-adjustment in her breathing, they were telling him a story. Not of a beginner, not even of a casual martial artist. This was someone who had been taught to make every movement efficient, every still moment purposeful. Brad, playing to the crowd, gave a mock sigh. All right, audience, place your bets. How long do you think she lasts? 10 seconds? 5. That earned a few laughs. But some people, like Renee, like Elliot, didn't laugh this time. Brad raised a hand to signal to start, but before he moved, Amara's eyes flicked to his lead leg. It was so quick that most people missed it. Elliot didn't. She'd measured his weight distribution, and then she did something that made 2 nearby students exchange puzzled glances. She let out a single, controlled breath, as though she was releasing the last of any tension she had left. Renee leaned forward. She's done this before. The man in the green tracksuit gave her a look. She's 12. Renee didn't blink. So was I when I learned to watch people's feet instead of their faces. The air in the room was beginning to change again, just a degree, like the slow shift in wind before a storm you don't yet see. Brad rolled his neck with a loud crack, grinning for the onlookers as if this was all light-hearted fun. But the more he tried to project control, the more it felt like the energy in the room wasn't quite following him anymore. Amara hadn't moved much at all, and that, somehow, was the problem. Most kids in her place would be shuffling, fidgeting, maybe glancing around for reassurance. She just stood there, calm and precise, her breathing even. Near the front row of the benches, Marcus Lee, a wiry 22-year-old in a white GI, was leaning forward on his elbows. He'd been smirking earlier, but now his expression was something else. Not exactly concern, but attention. She's measuring him, Marcus whispered to the guy next to him. The guy chuckled. She's guessing. Marcus didn't reply. He'd sparred enough to know the difference between a wild guess and a quiet calculation. On the far left wall, a pair of teenagers who'd been joking earlier now found themselves watching in silence. They didn't know why, but something about the girl's stance made it feel like this was more than a casual mismatch. Brad, sensing the crowd's wavering, amped up his voice. You're awfully still for someone about to get their first bruises. No answer. Cat got your tongue? Still nothing. The silence from her was starting to work against him. He thrived on banter, on the give and take of a public challenge. Without it, the rhythm broke, and the audience's focus began to slide from his performance to her stillness. Renee Porter, still seated in the back, caught that shift and folded her arms. She'd seen it before, in interrogation rooms, in security screenings. The loud ones could be read easily. The quiet ones were dangerous because they gave you nothing. Elliot Vargas, still watching like a hawk, noticed something else. Every time Brad took a step, Amara's toes and shoulders adjusted in micro-movements that matched, not reacting to him, but syncing with him, as if she was already in the rhythm of his body. That wasn't the mark of a casual learner. That was training. Serious training. Brad, feeling the silence stretch too long, finally motioned with his hand. All right, come on, kid. First move's yours. Impress me. Amara's eyes lifted to meet his. Not defiant. Not afraid. Just level. The crowd leaned forward almost in unison. The gym's fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, casting a pale sheen on the mats. Every step Brad took seemed to echo a little louder than it should have, like the whole room was holding its breath. Amara's gaze was fixed on him, but her mind, just for a heartbeat, wasn't here. A dimly lit garage. The smell of machine oil. Her uncle's shadow moving in slow arcs. The sound of his bare feet sliding over concrete. Never meet a fighter on their terms. Make them meet you on yours. He'd say it like he was telling her the weather, calm, almost distracted. But every time she remembered those words, she remembered the way his eyes locked with hers at the end, like it wasn't a suggestion. It was a law. The present pulled back into focus. Brad's hands were up now, his playful grin back in place, but the bounce in his movement had slowed, just a touch. Near the benches, Marcus Lee sat forward, squinting slightly. She's baiting him. The guy next to him snorted. She's a kid. She's just standing there. But Marcus had seen her weight shift. Once, subtly, when Brad tried to cut the distance too quickly. That wasn't hesitation. That was timing. Elliot Vargas's eyes tracked the gym bag in the corner again. It hadn't moved since he first spotted the dog tags, but the way Amara's glance had brushed over it earlier lingered in his mind. He'd seen people carry old military tags before. Parents, uncles, brothers, but never as lightly as she did, like the weight was in the meaning, not the metal. Brad finally broke the stillness with a half lunge, testing her reaction. Amara didn't flinch. Instead, her chin dipped half an inch, her shoulders rolling just enough to take in his movement without committing to her own. In the back, Renee Porter whispered under her breath, "She's reading him." The man beside her scoffed, but his voice was lower now, the earlier confidence thinning. Or she's about to get tagged in the face. Renee didn't argue. She knew what she was watching. She'd seen trained eyes before, the kind that don't just see, but process. For a moment, the gym felt smaller, as if the space between the two fighters had swallowed the rest of the room. And in the middle of it all, Amara's steady breathing was the only thing she controlled. Perfectly, deliberately, like she'd been taught to do since before she could remember. Brad circled to her left now, slower than before, almost casual. But Amara's body matched him without a wasted motion. She wasn't staring at his hands or his feet. She was watching the rhythm of him, the cadence in his shoulders, the small pauses between his shifts of weight. The crowd had gone quieter without realizing it. The playful heckles and low chuckles from earlier had thinned to scattered whispers. Marcus Lee's eyes narrowed. He'd trained here for 5 years, but he'd never seen someone that still without being frozen in fear. This was something else. Amara's mind flickered again. The garage floor was cold under her bare feet, but she was used to it. Her uncle, Joseph Adissa, a man whose voice could drop the air out of a room, paced slowly in front of her, his faded fatigue pants rustling at the knees. "Names," he'd told her once, holding up a set of scratch dog tags. "Names can weigh more than any body you'll ever have to lift." She'd traced the embossed letters with her thumb, Adissa, Joseph. Beneath, the unit numbers. Below that, the word retired. He had trained her in silence more than speech. Hours of drills, repetition, balance exercises, and scenarios she didn't understand at the time. No flashy moves. No glory. Just precision. Never make a first move until you've taken the other person's. When she was younger, she'd thought that meant letting them attack first. She understood now. It meant taking the moment, taking the mental space, taking control before the fight had even begun. Back in the present, Brad tried another quick jab toward her shoulder. Not a real strike, just a test. Her head turned just enough that his knuckles met air. No backward lean, no scramble, just absence. The teenagers near the wall exchanged a glance. "She's not scared," one of them muttered. Renee Porter shifted her weight in the back, her arms still crossed. She wasn't smiling, but there was a faint lift at the corner of her mouth. She'd seen this pattern before, in people who'd walked away from hard places carrying skill like an invisible weapon. Brad pulled back, his smirk thinning. "All right, little one," he said, voice just a shade tighter. "I hope you've got something to show us." Amara didn't answer. Her uncle had taught her long ago. Answers were for questions that mattered. Brad's footwork changed, heavier now, more grounded. He was done playing. The gym air felt thicker with each of his steps, as though the mats were absorbing the sound. Amara's eyes never left him. She didn't blink more than necessary, didn't shift without reason. Every micro-movement had intent. By the benches, Marcus leaned toward Elliot. She's not just trained. She's patterned. You see it. Elliot nodded slowly. Yeah, it's familiar. His voice trailed off as if the word itself had weight. Brad flicked another feint, then stepped back to reset. Amara followed him with her eyes, and for just a moment, her left hand brushed against something in her pocket. A small, worn leather strap threaded through a keyring. Attached to it was a single military challenge coin. Black enamel background. Gold trim. The insignia in the center. A falcon clutching a lightning bolt. Elliot's eyes locked on it instantly. He'd seen one like it once, in a framed display at a VFW hall, belonging to a man whose name carried quiet reverence among veterans. The name was at the edge of his tongue, but it slipped away as Brad moved in again. Amara's mind flickered back, not to the garage this time, but to a dusty clearing in the woods, years ago. Her uncle had placed the coin in her palm. If they know what this is, he'd said, you won't need to tell them anything else. And if they don't, it's not for them to know. She'd carried it ever since. Back in the gym, Brad exhaled sharply and squared up. He was starting to realize that every move he made felt accounted for, like she'd already filed it away before it happened. From the far corner, Renee Porter uncrossed her arms. Her voice carried just enough for Marcus to hear. That coin. I think I've seen it before. Marcus glanced at her. Where? Renee didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied Amara, the straightness of her spine, the stillness of her stance. It wasn't arrogance. It was readiness. The gym had gone almost silent now. Even those who didn't understand what they were seeing felt something in the air shift. Elliot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. No way, he murmured to himself. That's not. But he didn't finish the sentence. Brad exhaled through his nose, slow but deliberate. He'd been circling her for nearly 2 minutes now, and somehow, it was him who felt like the one being tested. He straightened his back and raised his voice, making sure the onlookers caught every word. All right, he said, enough of the dance. Let's see if you can actually do something. It wasn't quite hostile, more like the tone of a teacher tired of a lazy student. But under the surface was the sting of someone whose ego was beginning to itch. The coin in Amara's pocket felt warm against her fingers. She didn't squeeze it, didn't draw it out. She just let it sit there, like the weight it was. Her gaze rose to meet his, calm but unblinking. When we're done, she said softly, you'll apologize. It was so quiet that several people in the back didn't hear her at first. But Brad did. His smirk twitched. Oh, he said, letting out a small laugh. Confident. Certain, she replied. The word landed like a small stone dropped into deep water. No bravado, no rise in volume, just fact. Marcus Lee glanced at Elliot. You hear that? Elliot nodded, frowning. Yeah, and she means it. Brad adjusted his stance, hands up, and jerked his chin toward her. Fine. First one to score a clean tap wins. No bruises, no breaks. Let's keep it friendly for the crowd. Amara didn't nod. She simply stepped forward into the center, toes aligned with the seam in the mats. Her uncle had taught her to always know exactly where her feet were, and why. From the wall, Renee Porter's eyes tracked every inch of her movement. That slight forward lean wasn't a child's eagerness. It was measured engagement. A signal, if you knew what to look for. The bystanders instinctively shifted closer. Phones stayed in pockets. Something about the moment felt like it shouldn't be filmed. Brad raised his hands higher. Ready? Amara's voice was steady, almost too quiet for the gym. I've been ready. The crowd didn't cheer. No one counted down. The silence was its own signal. Somewhere deep in the room, someone's breath caught. The line had been drawn. The gym's usual clatter and chatter had dissolved into an almost sacred silence. Every breath was careful. Every eye fixated on the mat where Amara and Brad faced each other like two opposing tides, neither willing to rush, but both carrying a current beneath the surface. Brad's usual confident swagger had vanished, replaced by something taut and focused. His dark eyes flicked between Amara's calm gaze and the subtle shifts of her stance, searching for any sign of hesitation, but finding none. He lowered his hands slightly, preparing for his first move, but the playful edge was gone. This was serious now. Amara stood still as a statue, yet her body was alive with control. Her feet pressed firmly against the mat, knees bent just enough to absorb motion, shoulders relaxed but ready. There was no trace of youthful impatience or uncertainty in her posture. Instead, she exuded a quiet discipline, like the echo of a long legacy carried silently beneath her skin. Watching from the sidelines, Elliot Vargas's breath caught in his throat. He recognized that look, the cold fire in her eyes, steady and unwavering. It was the same fire he'd seen in hardened veterans, those who'd been tested beyond what most people could imagine. A shiver ran down his spine, the weight of that realization settling deep. Brad exhaled slowly, muscles taut as he feinted a left jab. Not an aggressive strike, but a calculated probe, testing the waters. Time seemed to slow as Amara's body responded, not by pulling back, but by shifting her weight with precise timing. Her feet adjusted barely an inch, her hips pivoting with grace and economy of movement. Her left arm rose smoothly, like water flowing around a rock, redirecting Brad's fist with a soft but decisive parry. The contact was subtle, a whisper of impact, but it disrupted his rhythm, sending his arm off course and tipping his balance just enough to unsettle him. The crowd's breath hitched collectively. The mocking smirks from moments ago had vanished, replaced by wide eyes and tense silence. Brad blinked, his confident facade cracking for the first time. His jaw clenched as a flicker of doubt flashed in his eyes. This was no ordinary sparring match, no easy victory. From the backbenches, Renee Porter exhaled quietly, her eyes shining with respect and something like awe. Even the teenagers who had been whispering nervously were now completely silent, caught in the spell of what was unfolding before them. The mats seemed to hold their breath, the moment stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. And through it all, Amara stood poised, her face calm, eyes steady, the weight of history and discipline carried lightly on her young shoulders. The first move had been made, and it was nothing less than a revelation. The subtle contact of Amara's parry had sent ripples through the gym, quiet but undeniable. Brad's confident grin faltered, replaced by a brief flicker of hesitation that none of the onlookers missed. His dark eyes darted, searching for the rhythm he'd lost, but it was gone, replaced by the steady pulse of something far more controlled. For a moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. The usual background noise, the rustle of GI fabric, whispered comments, the scrape of shoes on mats, all faded beneath the weight of the moment. Amara stood firm, steady as a mountain. Her breathing was measured, slow, as if each inhale and exhale was a deliberate act of control. Her small frame didn't betray the power beneath, a power tempered by years of quiet training and patience. Elliot Vargas, standing near the edge of the mat, felt a familiar chill run down his spine. He'd seen fighters who moved with skill before, but Amara's presence was different. It carried a history, a depth forged in trials beyond the gym. The steel in her eyes spoke of nights spent perfecting discipline under stern watch, of lessons learned not just in technique, but in survival. Whispers began to rise, soft at first, then gathering strength like the slow build of a tide. "Who is she?" a voice asked from the back row. "Where did she learn that?" Another added, "That stance, that timing, it's not just martial arts. It's military." Renee Porter, seated quietly, folded her arms and exchanged a knowing glance with Marcus Lee. "She's been taught by someone who's lived a hard life," Renee murmured. "Not just on the mats." Marcus nodded slowly, eyes narrowed in contemplation. "You don't move like that without reason. She's carrying more than technique. She's carrying legacy." Brad shook off the moment and squared his stance, jaw tight, but his eyes now reflecting something closer to respect. "All right then," he said quietly, voice stripped of earlier bravado. "Let's see what you've got." He lunged forward with a controlled strike, more precise than before, aiming to probe her defenses. Amara didn't hesitate. Her parry was crisp and efficient, redirecting the blow without wasted effort. Each subsequent counterattack was a study in discipline and control, no wild swings, just pure, purposeful motion. The crowd leaned in, captivated. The playful atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a solemn tension and awe. The jeers and snickers of before had been replaced by silent admiration and focused attention. Amara's calm remained unshaken, a quiet storm bearing the weight of her family's legacy, a testament to resilience and discipline passed down in silence. The gym was enveloped in a profound silence, as if time itself had slowed to watch. The usual sounds of shifting feet, whispered bets, and restless breath had faded, replaced by a quiet tension that filled every corner of the room. Every spectator seemed caught in a collective pause, waiting for something unseen but deeply felt. Amara's breathing was steady, measured, a slow and deliberate rhythm that anchored her like a calm sea beneath a gathering storm. Her small frame held a composure that defied her age, a calmness that wasn't born of inexperience, but of intense, disciplined training. Her eyes remained locked on Brad's, unwavering and resolute, reflecting a quiet strength that silenced the room. Brad shifted uneasily. The playful bravado he had carried when first approaching her was now replaced by a focused intensity. Each time he moved, Amara's body responded with almost instinctual precision, a subtle adjustment here, a shift in weight there, as though she was moving in perfect harmony with his intentions before they fully formed. Elliot Vargas stood at the edge of the mats, arms crossed, a crease deepening on his forehead. He had worked alongside some of the most disciplined fighters and veterans the country had produced, but Amara's control was unlike anything he'd seen. It was more than technique. It was a language spoken in silence, the quiet confidence of someone who had been forged in the fires of relentless discipline and unspoken trials. From the backbenches, Renee Porter's gaze sharpened. She leaned slightly forward, watching Amara's stance with a knowing eye. The way the girl's feet pressed into the mat, the soft bend of her knees absorbing tension without strain, these were marks of inherited discipline, not just practice. "Look at that," Renee whispered to Marcus Lee beside her. "This isn't just training. It's a legacy carried quietly, like a secret code." Marcus nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Amara. "I think I know whose footsteps she's following." In that charged moment, Amara shifted her weight forward ever so slightly, a fraction so small most wouldn't notice, but enough to signal intent. The space between her and Brad seemed to contract, the air thickening with unspoken anticipation. Brad tensed, muscles coiling, preparing to strike, but the calm before the storm was deceptive. Amara's stillness was not hesitation, it was control, a silent promise that what came next would change everything. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the delicate balance before the inevitable clash. Amara's feet slid silently across the gym's worn mats, finding their marks with careful precision. She lowered her center of gravity, bending her knees just enough to anchor herself firmly to the ground, neither rigid nor loose, but a perfect balance of readiness and control. Her small frame was a study in disciplined stillness, muscles relaxed yet coiled like a spring, waiting for the precise moment to release. Brad's confident glare faltered as he watched the subtle transformation unfold. The girl standing before him was no longer just a quiet child. She had become an unspoken force. The air around her seemed to thicken, charged with a presence that went beyond simple skill or youth. His lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of unease flashing behind his eyes. In the back row, Renee Porter sat straighter, her seasoned gaze fixed intently on Amara's stance. She exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Marcus Lee. "That stance," Marcus whispered under his breath. "I've only ever seen it a handful of times. And every time, it belonged to someone you didn't want to face." Elliot Vargas took a step closer, fists loose at his sides, but ready to clench at any moment. Years of training kicked in like a reflex. His eyes tracked Amara's every subtle movement, the way her shoulders squared slightly, the way her fingers curled just so, and he recognized the language of elite fighters, of warriors shaped by harsh realities. Amara's breathing was calm and steady, each inhale and exhale slow and deliberate, as if she were the eye of a storm that raged just beyond the edges of her calm. Her eyes locked onto Brad's, holding a quiet but unyielding resolve. There was no trace of anger, no flicker of fear, only the deep certainty of someone who had prepared for this moment her entire life. Brad swallowed hard, the tension radiating from him now palpable. He raised his hands deliberately, mirroring her stance as best he could, attempting to match the weight and purpose that she carried so effortlessly. Around the gym, the crowd leaned in as though pulled by an invisible magnet. The playful energy of moments before had dissolved into a reverent stillness, each spectator caught in the gravitational pull of the unfolding moment. Time seemed to slow, stretching thin like a taut wire ready to snap. Amara's gaze flicked briefly toward the worn dog tags tucked inside her jacket, a small, weathered symbol of legacy and sacrifice that few had noticed before. Then, with a quiet steadiness, she centered herself again, eyes narrowing slightly as she prepared to meet the challenge ahead. Near the mats, one of the younger students murmured in awe, "She's not just a fighter, she's a legend in the making." The gym fell into a hushed silence. No one breathed. The moment had arrived when Amara's presence spoke louder than any words ever could. The gym held its breath as if the world itself had paused. The dull hum of fluorescent lights above seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a heavy stillness that wrapped the room like a shroud. Every eye was fixed on the two figures standing face to face, Brad and Amara, poised in perfect tension, the air charged with the silent promise of something extraordinary about to unfold. Brad exhaled slowly through his nose, tightening his jaw as he made the first move. His strike was swift but deliberate, a sharp, controlled jab aimed at Amara's right shoulder. It was the kind of measured test designed to gauge an opponent's defense without fully committing. His eyes never left hers, searching for any crack in her calm exterior. But Amara moved with a grace that seemed almost effortless. Her weight shifted subtly, her feet pivoting with surgical precision. Rather than meet his fist head-on, she redirected it, a fluid parry that was neither aggressive nor defensive, but a perfectly balanced motion that carried the weight of countless hours of silent discipline. Her left forearm rose, angled just so, meeting Brad's incoming strike with a soft but decisive contact. The sound was almost a whisper, the faintest scrape of skin against skin. Brad's fist slid off her arm, veering wide enough to throw off his balance, causing him to stagger just slightly for the first time. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and electric. The earlier murmurs and whispered bets evaporated into a stunned silence. No cheers, no gasps, only the heavy, charged quiet of disbelief and awe. Brad blinked rapidly, his confident mask cracking. For the first time, his eyes revealed uncertainty, a flicker of shock mixed with grudging respect. The reality was sinking in. This was no ordinary opponent, no child to be dismissed lightly. This was someone forged in fire, carrying a legacy and resilience that eclipsed his assumptions. From the sidelines, Renee Porter's eyes widened, the corners of her mouth tightening into a subtle nod of acknowledgement. She glanced at Marcus Lee, who met her gaze with his own quiet admission, the unmistakable recognition of mastery in Amara's controlled, effortless movement. Elliot Vargas tightened his fists, his expression unreadable but his eyes shimmering with a mixture of admiration and reverence. To him, each motion told a story of silent sacrifice, relentless training, and inherited strength, passed down like a sacred trust. The crowd remained frozen, breaths caught in throats, as if the moment had suspended the very flow of time. Amara's face held no trace of triumph. Her expression was serene, composed, focused, a quiet statement that this was only the opening act of a far greater story. Slowly, she lowered her arm, eyes still locked with Brad's, conveying without words a challenge and a promise. This is just the beginning. The moment stretched, suspended in the heavy silence that followed Amara's precise parry. The gym was frozen, breaths held, eyes wide, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of realization. No one moved, no one spoke. The hum of life outside this room felt impossibly distant. Brad stood shaken, his arms still slightly raised in mid-motion, as if unsure how to recover from the subtle but undeniable shift. His usual bravado had evaporated, replaced by a cold recognition of what he had just faced. His jaw clenched tight, fists trembling ever so slightly, the flush of disbelief coloring his cheeks. Across the room, a ripple of shifting gazes passed through the crowd, from curiosity to surprise to awe. The quiet murmurs began to swell, low whispers laced with wonder and respect. "That wasn't just skill, that was something else," someone muttered. "Who is she really?" another asked, voice barely audible but urgent. Renee Porter, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, caught a fleeting glimpse of the dog tags tucked beneath Amara's jacket. The symbol was faint but unmistakable, a mark that stirred memories buried deep in her own past. Marcus Lee's lips parted slightly, as if about to speak, but he hesitated, the weight of recognition dawning slowly. "That's no ordinary girl," he said finally, voice low but certain. Elliot Vargas's gaze was sharp, piercing through the layers of doubt. He knew, without a doubt, the story behind the quiet girl standing poised and unshaken, a legacy of discipline, sacrifice, and unyielding strength. Brad lowered his hands slowly, the tension in his body shifting from confrontation to reluctant respect. His eyes met Amara's, and in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a mutual acknowledgement of skill, honor, and the price paid to carry it. The crowd exhaled collectively, the atmosphere changing from anticipation to reverence. The moment had shifted something intangible but profound in every witness. Amara's posture remained calm and dignified, not a trace of arrogance or triumph in her expression. Instead, there was quiet strength, the kind that does not boast but commands respect by its mere presence. As the silence stretched, a new energy settled over the gym, one of understanding, transformation, and an unspoken promise that this was far more than a simple challenge. The gym remained enveloped in a heavy hush, the weight of what had just transpired pressing on every soul present. No cheers erupted, no voices rose. Instead, there was a collective, reverent stillness, the kind that follows the shattering of assumptions. Brad, still rooted in place, lowered his hands slowly, as if reluctant to admit what he'd just witnessed. His eyes locked onto Amara's, searching for any sign of bravado or weakness, but found only calm and quiet strength. The flicker of doubt in his gaze deepened, tempered by a grudging respect that refused to be spoken aloud. Around them, the spectators exchanged glances, disbelief morphing into awe. Whispers grew, soft but charged with a newfound respect. "There's history here, a legacy," one voice murmured. Another nodded quietly. "This isn't just talent. It's discipline passed down through generations." Elliot Vargas remained motionless, his fists unclenching slowly as he absorbed the gravity of the moment. He recognized the depth beneath Amara's calm exterior, a story of sacrifice and unwavering commitment woven into every fiber of her being. Renee Porter's eyes lingered on the subtle dog tags peeking from beneath Amara's jacket, the worn metal catching the light. The symbol was a silent testament, a mark of service and sacrifice that few could claim, even fewer could understand. Marcus Lee leaned toward Renee, voice low but filled with conviction. "That girl carries a legacy not easily spoken of, a quiet strength forged in the fires of history." The room's energy shifted palpably. The playful tension of moments ago had transformed into a profound respect. Amara stood as a quiet pillar in the center of it all. No words, no boasts, only presence. Brad finally exhaled, the breath heavy with acceptance. Without a word, he gave a subtle nod, an unspoken apology and acknowledgement wrapped in one. The crowd responded not with noise, but with a silence filled with understanding. They had witnessed more than a sparring match. They had glimpsed a story, a legacy, and a strength that transcended age, background, and expectation. Amara's eyes softened slightly, a quiet grace touching her features. She knew the moment was not about proving dominance, but reclaiming dignity, through presence, precision, and the silent power of truth. The heavy silence was finally broken by a voice from the back of the room. Quiet, tentative, but carrying the weight of recognition. "That's Amara Johnson's granddaughter," a woman whispered, clutching a faded photograph in trembling hands. Her voice cut through the stillness like a soft bell tolling a truth long kept hidden. The gym seemed to shift, as if the very air had changed. A ripple of surprise swept through the crowd, eyes widening as the names settled into the space between them. Whispers began to bloom, growing in strength and urgency. "Amara Johnson, the legend," someone breathed. "The veteran who taught half this town." Renee Porter's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her gaze locked onto the dog tags glinting beneath Amara's jacket. The realization struck her like a sudden gust of wind. The symbol of service and sacrifice was no mere decoration. It was a testament to the bloodline and legacy this quiet girl carried with such unassuming grace. Marcus Lee's lips parted in a quiet confession. "She's not just a fighter. She is the legacy," he said, voice heavy with reverence. The room seemed to draw closer, the crowd leaning in to catch every word, every small detail that connected the girl before them to the woman whose name echoed through local history. Pieces clicked into place, the exactness of Amara's movements, the calm power in her stance, the deep well of strength she drew from without ever boasting or speaking of it. Brad's gaze dropped to the floor, shame and regret mingling in his eyes. His earlier arrogance faded, replaced by a humbled respect. "I didn't know," he admitted softly, voice thick with remorse. Amara lifted her eyes, steady and composed. There was no gloating in her expression, only the quiet dignity inherited from a grandmother who had taught her that true strength comes not from dominance, but from honor. "It wasn't about proving anything to you," Amara said, her voice calm but unwavering. "It was about honoring where I come from and who I am." The crowd remained silent, transformed by the moment. The lesson was clear. Respect is not demanded through force or words, but earned through discipline, truth, and presence. The faded photograph passed from hand to hand, a symbol of legacy, sacrifice, and a young girl's journey to reclaim her place in a story far greater than herself. As the realization settled over the gym, a quiet power hung in the air, the power of a legacy carried not with noise or pride, but with humility and grace. The weight of the moment settled over the gym like a soft rain, cleansing the tension that had filled the air. The crowd remained hushed, the kind of silence that doesn't demand attention but commands respect. What had unfolded was not a victory won through noise or aggression. It was a truth quietly revealed, a strength quietly claimed. Amara stood tall, yet there was no trace of arrogance in her posture. Her eyes, steady and wise beyond her 12 years, scanned the room with a calm assurance. She did not raise her voice, nor did she need to. The weight of her presence filled the space, a quiet storm of resilience, discipline, and inherited legacy. She spoke softly, her words deliberate and clear, carrying the authority of someone who had seen hardship, sacrifice, and quiet triumphs. "This isn't about defeating someone else," she began, voice steady and measured. "It's about knowing your worth, not through shouting or proving, but through the discipline you carry inside. Strength isn't about how loudly you claim it, but how quietly you hold your ground." The gym absorbed her words in thoughtful silence. Some exchanged glances, others nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of what she said settle deep within. Brad, humbled and visibly changed, lowered his gaze and met Amara's eyes with sincerity. "I misjudged you," he said quietly, voice thick with regret. "I'm sorry." Amara's lips curved into a small, understanding smile. "Apologies are a start," she replied gently, "but respect must be earned, in every moment, every action, and every choice." Around them, the crowd's energy shifted. What had been a place of challenge and skepticism transformed into one of reflection and reverence. The story of this young girl, silent, strong, and deeply grounded, became a lesson in humility and grace for everyone who witnessed it. Renee Porter and Marcus Lee exchanged meaningful glances, their usual guarded expressions softened by recognition. Even Elliot Vargas, the stoic veteran, allowed a brief flicker of admiration to cross his face. As people slowly began to disperse, the atmosphere remained charged with quiet transformation. The gym, once a stage for doubts and underestimation, now stood as a space of acknowledgement and change. Amara's legacy was no longer a shadow whispered in corners or hidden beneath dog tags. It was alive, present, and embraced. In reclaiming her dignity not with force, but with quiet strength, Amara restored something far greater, a reminder that true power is often silent, humble, and enduring. 3 months had passed since that defining day in the gym. The worn mats still bore the faint marks of countless footsteps, but the atmosphere had transformed, lighter, more respectful, and filled with an unspoken reverence. The space that once echoed with skepticism and dismissal now hummed quietly with renewed purpose. Amara moved through the gym with a quiet confidence that seemed to ripple through the air around her. No longer the shy, underestimated girl who had drawn curious glances and doubtful whispers, she was now a steady presence, calm, assured, and deeply respected. The discipline that had once been hidden beneath a veil of humility now shone subtly in every precise movement, every deliberate word. She led a small class of younger students, their eager faces illuminated by the soft gym lights. With patience and care, Amara guided them through stances, blocks, and strikes, instilling not only technique but the values of respect, perseverance, and quiet strength. Her voice was gentle but firm, each instruction weighted with the wisdom passed down through generations. She taught them that strength was not about boasting or domination, but about discipline and integrity. Among the students was Brad, once her antagonist, now a humbled learner. His arrogance had been replaced by thoughtful humility. He listened intently, absorbing each lesson with a newfound respect for the quiet power he had once mocked. Watching Amara, he saw not just a fighter, but a teacher and a living testament to a legacy he had failed to recognize. From the sidelines, Renee Porter observed with a soft smile. Turning to Marcus Lee, she remarked, "She's changed more than just this gym. She's changed how we all understand strength, not just in combat, but in character." Marcus nodded in agreement, his eyes tracking Amara's careful guidance. A legacy reclaimed, and a new one being built. One grounded in grace and dignity. Near the entrance, the dog tags that had once been tucked away now hung proudly on a small hook, catching the afternoon light. They were a silent emblem of sacrifice, honor, and the history that shaped Amara's journey. A reminder that the past was never far, but the future belonged to those willing to carry that legacy forward with humility and courage. After class, Brad approached Amara quietly, his voice sincere. "Thank you for everything." Amara smiled gently, her eyes warm but steady. Strength is a journey, not a destination. We all have more to learn. As the gym settled into the calm of evening, Amara stood by the window, gazing out at the fading light. The quiet power she carried was no longer hidden. It was alive, thriving, and breathing through every life she touched. The story was no longer about proving herself, but about passing the torch, with grace, with dignity, and with an unbreakable spirit. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.